Welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to start creating a lifestyle by design. From entrepreneurship, money and finance, tax optimization and residencies, and everything in between. This show highlights the nuances of a true global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the show. And in this episode, I sit down with Hoff. Sean is the CEO and founder of Moniker, and him and his team curate perfectly planned corporate team building events around the globe. In this discussion, we not only talk about starting and growing a business, but also about remote work culture and things that you should look for when you are planning a corporate team event or retreat, especially if it is in another country or another continent. So let's dive right into this episode.
So we started Moniker back in 2013. The idea came about, I had been working in the corporate world, in investment bank for about 4 or 5 years. And during my time there, the bank had this program called like the President's Club. The President's Club was basically a top brokers type trip where they took the top, I think it was top 60 performers. And I was lucky enough to qualify for a few years, and I was in my mid 20s at that point, and going on these trips just like opened my eyes to this whole world of travel that I just did not know existed before. And so year by year, I got more involved on like the planning side of it. So internal to the bank, like they had like an internal planning committee. So I got more involved in that, and so I could get more exposure to like how these trips actually came together. And then I was able to also just like observe the agency that the bank had hired to plan this trip, just how they operated, like the things that they took into consideration. And it kind of culminated, like I was starting to fall out of love with what I was doing in the banking world. And I knew I'd always kind of had this itch to work in the travel industry. I had some previous job experience working in travel, and it just always like kind of captured my attention. And so for the first time ever, I saw this like, okay, here is a career or a job that somebody has been able to combine both like the professional side of travel, as well as just the fun side. And yeah, in our final year, the bank was going to Barcelona, and I actually did my MBA in Barcelona, and I ended up being a bicycle tour guide there when I graduated, because it was the summer of 2008, and it was not a great time to be looking for jobs. And so I knew that city quite well, and I just started picking apart the itinerary that the agency was suggesting, and by the time the trip came, I just like was kind of taking a little group of people away from the main itinerary, and then taking them on like a private bike tour or going to this great tapas restaurant that I knew, and things like that. And so when we came back, my managing director called me into his office and chewed me out a little bit. And basically his whole thing was, they had planned this elaborate trip. They'd spent a lot of money, and people weren't showing up to the things that they planned because they were off doing things with me. And that's where we just kind of like, well, hang on a second. Like, that means that I did something better that people were more interested in. And I really enjoyed it. Like, I got a lot of pats on the back and notes afterwards, basically saying that, the things that I had helped organize were really fun and memorable for them. And that was when I kind of left. It was a pretty big leap. But that was back in 2013. I left the bank. I had no idea what I was doing really. But the idea was that we were just going to start planning really fun, memorable, creative trips for companies, and it's grown since then. And so now here we are, 11 years later. We have a team of 20 people full time spread across Canada. We have clients all over the world, some in Europe, some in the US, and we plan trips everywhere. Like this year alone, we've had a group that took over a private island in the Maldives. We have a group right now in Lisbon. We have groups in Colombia. We have groups in the Caribbean, all over.
So I'm curious, you mentioned there that you quit your job and didn't really know what that next step in terms of the business was. Like, what did that look like for you? And obviously we're talking 10 years-ish ago. So this was a while back before remote work and team building and culture, I think, was not quite so prevalent as it is today. But what did that look like in terms of you quitting and being like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what the next step is, but I'm just gonna go?
I had some training before working in the travel industry. When I graduated from my undergrad university, I studied business, and I think I was pretty convinced I was going to go work in the finance world or whatever. But through a family connection, I had an opportunity to a family friend of ours actually worked as a business development at a large online travel agency in Canada. And just coming fresh out of university, I kind of put together this idea and I said, how come you're not targeting the student market? And his response was, well, of course we are. Like, here's the flights down to Mexico and Daytona Beach, and here's the hotels that you can book. And I said, yeah, but the student market works differently. They don't want to go book the flights and book the hotels and figure out what they're going to do day by day on their own. They want somebody to just put it nice together in a package with a little bow and give it to them in one piece, one price. And the guy was like, okay, put together a plan, show me. And I had no idea, honestly, like where that was going. But I spent some time and I put together this business plan, where basically here's how you could do it and here's how you would promote it by going to the campuses like at the beginning of the year and then going back towards the end of the year, just before people start to book their spring break plans. And I gave it to him and I said, here's the playbook. I thought that it was just going to be like, great, thanks for the plan. Here's some compensation. And then I would walk away. But no, instead he was like, this is fantastic. Okay, great. When can you start? And that kind of took me off guard. I was 22 or 21 years old. So they hired me on to like roll out this plan. And I did that with them for about a year and a half. And it was an incredible experience. Like I learned how to start to like build a brand, build a business. I was contacting universities and confirming like, when is your reading week? Like what dates would that be? And trying to figure out like where people would be going. So I had some exposure to like building out something early on, but it was within a larger organization and it had the backing obviously of a huge company. So when I left the bank to start my own, I wasn't 100% like unprepared and jumping into the deep end with no training whatsoever. But it was more like, okay, here's this new industry. It's called the MICE industry, meetings, incentive, conferences, and events. And I knew I was going to have to figure it out. So one of the first things I did was actually I started attending like industry events, going to like networking functions and different industry associations would host like lunch and learns and things. So I just started showing up while I was still working at the bank. And I started telling people, like, here's my plan and idea. And everybody thought I was crazy. But I met this one woman. Her name was Julia. And she had 20 years experience in the industry. And she likes my chutzpah of what I was trying to do. And so I kind of said to her, I was like, look, I'm going to need a mentor. And I know I have some ideas and I have a bit of like some financial backing pulled together right now to pull this off, to at least get it off the ground. But I would love to have somebody help guide me through this first few steps of this business. So in that first year, my first hire was actually somebody who was 20 years older than me. And her and she kind of showed me the ropes of the industry, and she kind of, helped explain how things work and all the acronyms in our industry. So I did learn the ropes a lot from surrounding myself with people who knew way more than me. And then it just kind of grew from there. Like, one hire went to two hires went to three hires, and then client base started to grow. And next thing you know, we were up to like 10 people running 15 trips a year.
The trajectory of the business, I'm always very curious about that when speaking to entrepreneurs, because everyone's journey looks completely different. So I'm curious what the industry was like back then, and if you've seen any changes, booms in certain themes, places of the world since, let's say, 2020.
Yeah. So heading into COVID, most of our trips were for large organizations that were doing incentives. So it would be like the top 50, the top 60, or whatever, however the criteria was. But it was like basically like top performer type things. And we did work with a few tech clients, but predominantly they were like, they had an office, and once a year they wanted to go somewhere, just kind of like a hangout, have some fun, team building, very little, if any, work. COVID hits, obviously a huge disruption to the travel industry, but it actually had a silver lining. So what it did for us was that coming out of COVID, a ton of companies moved fully into the remote or hybrid setup. So here you have like literally thousands and thousands of companies that are giving up their offices, discovering that all of a sudden, hey, it's okay to hire somebody across the country, if not in a different continent. And now all of a sudden it was like, hey, we don't see each other every day, and so this getaway, this offsite, isn't about just team building. It's like this is actually might be the only time per year that our team sees each other in person. And so the size of the market for these corporate retreats actually grew coming out of COVID, which put us in a great place. And then also just like the intention of them changed. So instead of it being about the hanging out together and the team building, it was all of a sudden like, okay, we're going to work hard during the mornings, and there was a significant work component of them. And they actually, if anything, they grew from like 3 nights of hanging out to like 4 or 5 nights, where it was work in the morning. After lunch, there might be a few kind of breakouts or sessions where people could like go work on something independently with their team, and less focus on the team building. Now it's kind of come back into balance, but it was really interesting to see coming out of COVID, just like how many companies that had given up their office were now calling us up and saying, hey, listen, we want to plan 2 of these per year, because this is going to be the 1 or 2 times per year that we can actually get together in person. So it was interesting for us, that whole 2020 to 2023 time frame.
And I can imagine that, as you said, it's quite slow for that initial year, but then really picking up just due to different trends that you had probably never seen before in the corporate workspace. So I'm curious, running a team myself, and probably many listeners running a team, what are some elements that goes into making a successful corporate retreat for those looking or potentially thinking about having a corporate retreat with their team anywhere in the world? Curious on some popular destinations that you see as well, for any of the listeners.
Yeah, I'll use our own company as an example. I mean, we know what we're doing, and we do this twice a year. So Moniker has 2 internal retreats per year, one in January, one in August. We call them Monicons, Moniconference. And the things that really shape like where we go, what we do, what the agenda looks like are a few things. So first of all, our team is spread across Canada. We've got people in Vancouver. We've got people just outside of Calgary in Canmore, Alberta, Edmonton, Toronto, a lot of people in Toronto, and then a few people in Ottawa and elsewhere. So the first things we do is we figure out where can we get people relatively easily. So we look at direct flights. There's a great website. It's called flightconnections.com. And you can go in there and you can type in the airport that you have someone coming from, and it shows you exactly where direct flights go from that city. So that usually helps us narrow it down. Obviously, we factor in costs. I mean, most of these cities can fly direct to London or Paris, but that's going to be a little bit more expensive than flying to, for example, Puerto Vallarta or somewhere like Nashville. In terms of length, we usually try to the sweet spot for us seems to be 4 nights. And what we do in terms of the itinerary is basically we try to do 1/3 work, 1/3 like team building and activities, and 1/3 complete free time, leisure, hangout space. The 1/3 work, how we always structure it is, I do something called the State of the Union, and I highly recommend this to anybody who's leading a team. Is like it's an opportunity for me to get up in front of the company and basically say, here's how we did in the last year. So looking back, here's how we're where I think we are today. So kind of like a SWOT analysis, like a quick snapshot of the business, and here's what I think looking ahead. And looking ahead is kind of like strategy, vision, goals for the year ahead. And the one that we do in the middle part of the year is kind of the shorter version of that. Here's how we've done up until that part of the year. Here's where we are midway through the year, and here's what we have planned for the rest of this year. It's very transparent. It gets everybody very engaged. We share financials. We really talk about like, here are our plans and here are the things and the challenges that we're facing. But I found that it's extremely helpful to get people feeling like they're part of this company and that they have a stake. We usually try to bring in like a guest speaker or a facilitator. We just got back from Prince Edward Island on the east coast of Canada, and we brought in an excellent facilitator. His name is Sean Jahal. And he kind of walked our team through just like a few things that really helped us like figure out like how to manage our time better and like how to like set goals and manage your calendar better, because that's something that was popping up in our feedback, was that people are just felt inundated with meetings. The team building, we try to do like things that are a little bit more like traditional and formal team building. So we had like the Moniker Olympics, full of different challenges and games and stuff. But then we have some like less traditional team building where, for example, We chartered a lobster trap fishing boat. We went out on the Atlantic, and we basically learned how to like literally learn the ropes of how to like how they fish for lobster. And that was just like a fun experience, and we all learned how to play the spoons while the captain played the fiddle. Memorable experience. And then what we find is like in the downtime, people are still talking about work, or it's just an opportunity for them to like still build those relationships. But that's how we would structure it. And that's what we usually recommend with our clients is like, don't over program. Just because it's like during the work week doesn't mean that you should have 9 to 5 every single day of like content and work. You'd be amazed at what happens during the free time, that comes back to you. And then as well, like what we look for in a destination is, it is getting harder, is like ideally you keep everybody under one roof. And if you can, the longer or as long as you can go as a company trying to keep things like in a VRBO or an Airbnb, or even just like a small private like villa or home, that's ideal, when you can kind of like get snacks in the kitchen together, or like go and hang out without having servers walking around asking you if you want something. We've always found that is like the best vibe. But we're now getting into the point at 20 people where it's harder and harder to find smaller villas like that, and so we're moving into like the hotels and small boutique kind of places.
Are you looking to become a diversified global citizen? If this is a lifestyle that you're seeking to create, we can help. Whether it be multiple residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, trusts, or company formations, we operate in 30 plus of the most tax-friendly jurisdictions around the globe to get you structured properly. Head to the link in the show notes to learn more and to get your global citizen journey underway today. Because I can imagine, I mean, I'm curious, what is the average size of company that you typically plan for? Because I can imagine if you're getting to, I would think even like 10 plus, but you're saying 20 plus, then it becomes difficult to have everyone under one roof and activities and people don't show up. Is that a challenge that you see a lot?
Yes. So the average group that we do is about 150 to 200 people. We're talking full companies. And in those cases, in a perfect world, we're buying out an entire hotel. So we will specifically look for hotels that are around the size of the clients that we're working with. And we'll prioritize ones that are like right in their sweet spot, as opposed to have an extra 20, 30 rooms that we might need to like buy out empty. And the reason for that is it allows us a little bit more flexibility and privileges of like what we can do. So you can totally customize the menu. You can throw branding and company logos everywhere around the property. You can use the grounds that you wouldn't normally. Like if you want to set up an inflatable obstacle course in the middle of their courtyard, you can do that if you have a buyout of the hotel. You can't do that if there's other guests there. So even though like at some point you outgrow the ability to have your own one roof, there is still like you can still find hotels that if you do an exclusive buyout, then you kind of still get half of those privileges. So that's something to look out for.
And I was going to ask too, are there any not best practices that you've seen that if somebody is thinking of organizing a corporate company retreat, something that you would recommend to stay away from, whether it be on a larger or smaller scale?
Yes. Coming back to over programming, we see this all the time where clients are just trying to cram things in from like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And the mentality is, well, it's a work day. It's a work week. Like we should be working a full day. We're paying them to work. And it's like, that shouldn't be your intention. The point of this is to truly, hopefully, is to invest in like building better relationships among your people. And if everybody's sitting in a ballroom or, like a breakout room and they're just like slaving away all day, it's actually going to get them to resent going on these retreats. And then as well, I think just like the focus, like we've seen teams that either go too short, like they think 2 nights or 1 night is because it's economical or it's more affordable to do that, but it kind of defeats the purpose. Like you're going to have a sunk cost in flying everybody to the destination. So enjoy it. If you actually have like a 2-night program, by the time everybody arrives on day 1, you might be able to squeeze in like a welcome reception and a dinner. You have 1 day of content, and then on the third morning they're flying home. So we always recommend like at least 3 nights, but four nights seems to be the sweet spot where you can fit in enough work to justify it, but then as well have enough time to have like leisure and team building and other stuff included.
I'm curious your perspective on remote work. I know, especially in Canada and the US, there was a big shift in the last few years of nobody in the office, everyone working from home. Being in the industry that you're in, I'm curious, and I know that's slightly swinging the other way now, especially in places like Toronto. I'm curious what your opinion is and how you see best to run a successful business.
We're big fans. Like we're 100% big believers in the remote work. We had an office for 6 years up until COVID. We were doing work from home Wednesdays, so we kind of were testing the waters, but it was just more of a, I don't know what our reasoning for it was, but it actually helped us really be like prepared when we moved to 5 days at home remote during COVID. For us, there's a lot of benefits. Like for us, like obviously when our lease came up, we had a conversation with the team. We're like, what do you guys think? Should we go back to the office? Do you miss seeing each other face to face every day, or 4 days a week, or should we just give it up? And every single person voted to give it up. For us, like it allowed us to start hiring talent across the country. And at this point, we would hire talent anywhere. And I think for a lot of companies, like for example, we have a few tech clients that are based in and around Silicon Valley in California. And when they go to hire like top talent engineers or programmers, like they're spending $300,000-400,000 on these salaries. And then we've heard from their like head of people or their HR teams is that when the company made a decision to go remote, all of a sudden they were hiring incredible talent from Ukraine or from Portugal or from South America for half the price. They're still getting paid very well in their respective countries, but it was just this like you don't have to compete against what the craziness that was going on in Silicon Valley. The other side of it is it brought in different perspectives. Like we now have people literally across the country. Canada is a very diverse country. The attitudes and just kind of the perspectives of the people from the West Coast are very different from those from the East Coast and from Toronto. And I love that. I love the diversity it brings to our team. And then just from a flexibility standpoint, like I think for us, we don't find it to be a challenge. Like we use tool like Slack is our go-to tool. We're in it all day long. And it's not just used for work. Like we have a channel specifically dedicated to sharing memes and jokes. And we love it. Like people are just popping in like GIFs and things all day long, and it keeps the atmosphere a little bit light. We set up different channels. We have a book club channel. We have a channel for sharing music. We have a channel for sharing recipes. Like there's ways to keep it kind of fun and light. We're also on video calls very often, and that helps keep the face to face. And then, as I mentioned, we also do the 2 retreats per year where we'll gather everybody in person. So like I don't think if I were to ask the team, how do you feel about remote? Would you rather go back to the office? Like, I don't think anybody is missing it. And I don't think anybody would want to go back. And we see that a lot with our clients. Like some of our clients have started to like talk about going like 1 day to the office mandate, and the feedback or what they hear from their teams is overwhelmingly like against it. So it is a shift, and it is a very popular debate right now. The whole return to office versus like keeping remote. I personally think that in the long run, the companies that are open and flexible, if you're a person who enjoys going to the office and sitting down with your colleagues and going for coffee at break, but if you're a person who prefers to work at home and that's where you get your best focus, your best work done, the companies that are open and open-minded to allowing both, those are going to be the ones that win out on the search for the best talent in the long run. The ones that force you into working from home or force you only into working in an office, you're going to lose out on candidates who want the flexibility or the option to choose.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I know that not every company in person does, but I also think it increases productivity in the way that I see it, because you're not just dilly dallying around the office for 1, 2, 3 hours per day. For me and for those that I hire, and I assume for you as well, I want it to be less hours if needed, but all of those hours being as productive as possible. We're not wasting any time in the day, whether it be work time or personal time.
Yeah, I'm part of a few like peer groups and things like an organization called EO. And when I tell people that we have a fully remote team and everybody works from home, like I constantly face questions like, how do you know they're working? Like, how do you know they're being productive? Who's to say that they didn't go for an hour, 2 hour long lunch? And at the end of the day, it's like, if you have employees that you don't truly feel confident or trust that they're doing the job, then I think you've got a bigger problem. Um, as far as I'm concerned, if at the end of the week people are getting what they need to get done on time and deadlines aren't falling through the gaps, and it's fine. People can manage their time as they wish. Like we have people who prefer, we have flex hours, and we have people who prefer to start at 7 in the morning and finish at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I prefer to work later so I can spend the morning with my son. That's fine. And again, like I think this whole mentality of like, if you're not at your desk and we can't see you at your desk, you're clearly not being productive. That's outdated. And I think that whole mentality has to change. Some people are more productive when they sit down for an hour than other people who sit down for an hour and try to do the same task. It's just a results based work environment is always going to be more productive than where it's just hours focused or FaceTime focused.
Completely agree with that. Well, thank you for being on the show, Sean. Where can people find the business online?
So our website is www.monikerpartners.com. Yeah, if you go there, you can scroll through. We have a section of our past trips and retreats that we've planned. There's some pretty amazing videos from programs that we've run around the world. And you can learn all about how we work. We also have on LinkedIn, we have a blog where we share tips and tricks on how to build culture in remote teams. And you can find that on my LinkedIn at Sean, Sean, Hoff.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I'd appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag us at Work, Wealth, and Travel. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us on this global citizen journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.